What is going on, guys? In today's video I will show you the top 5 best builds in Path of Exile 2. If you're looking for any of these builds on the website, then click my link description or the pinned comment. So this is an endgame build that utilizes the power of the attribute stacking to increase its performance. Our main goal is to stack as much strength, dexterity and intelligence as possible, to then scale it with our unique items such as the Pillar of the God and the Hand of Wisdom and the Action. One of the best things about our setup is that all it needs to function at the start is the Pillar of the Caged God, which is pretty affordable on a budget, but then later on we can scale it incredibly high with each unique item and massive power upgrades and much more. Our main playstyle will revolve around using the Tempest Flurry in the combination with the Charged Staff that can hit multiple times and create lightning shockwaves. If you want to zoom through the maps insanely fast while destroying anything and everyone that crosses your path, then this is the one for you. So let me show you the build, and for the main class I have chosen to go with the mercenary and our ascendancy is the Gambling Legionnaire. Then for the first skill we have the Tempest Flurry with the support gems such as the Martial Tempo, Inspiration, Glacianation and the Ice Bite. Then second we get the Charged Staff with the Primal Armament, Lightning Infusion, Overcharge and the Concentrated Effect. Then next we got the Tempest Belt with the Concentrated Effect, Overabundance, Elemental Focus and the Close Combat. Next we have the Wind Dancer with the Blind, Maim and the Pin. Next up we have the Herald of the Ice with Magnified Effect, Lightning Infusion, Primal Armament and the Elemental Focus. Next we got the Combat Frenzy with the Profusion. And finally, for the last one we are using the Glacial Cascade with no support gems. Most of the setup is structured around using the Tempest Fury and the Charged Staff to delete huge amount of enemies in seconds. So we use gems and skills that will support and increase their duration and damage, while the rest are powerful buffs and utility skills that usually get activated in the background. Also, at this point I would usually show you a leveling build, but this time our particular setup is specifically meant for only endgame, because it will only start working when we get the quarterstaff called the Pillar of the Caged God. So until that point I would recommend to use my cheap gas grenade build, which link you can find in the description and on this website. Next up we have our passive tree, and if you are interested in a full in-depth guide on how it works, then check out my beginner guide. So let's take a look at our setup, and we want to start at this armor and evasion node, then go like this while also grabbing the battle hardened and the relentless. Then from here keep on moving while also on our way getting these two, and also the beef. Then afterwards we go like this, and then here at the end we want to go up top and get this blood magic. We want to use this specific node because scaling mana and handling mana cost is expensive, while maintaining very high tankiness, so this is a great keystone to solve any potential mana problem. Then after this, we now want to circle back and this time go to the bottom and get this brute strength. And then as you can see from here, the whole path pretty much just goes in a straight line, so just follow it while also grabbing everything that you can see right here. The only thing that you need to keep in mind is that you don't need to get these two, so the Lightning Rod and the Flash Storm, if you still haven't equipped the Hands of the Wisdom and Action. And then from here, the most important nodes and the ones we want to get is the Storm and the River, as they increase our evasion rating while also letting the freeze to build up faster for more consistent explosions with the Herald of the Ice. And on top of this, it also makes keeping up our Charged Staff much easier, by giving it an extra duration when consuming a single power charge, since it counts as using an extra charge. And then finally, the last most important part is the Resonance, as it is one of the core nodes of our build. It will convert the frenzy charges gained from the Combat Frenzy into the power charges, which will allow us to cast our insane Charged Staff. And then now let's go all the way to the middle again, and for Ascendancy build, this is what we have. So at the beginning you want to get the adaptive capability, then second get the enhanced effectiveness. Because of how many attributes we will stack, this node will grant us a massive amount of life early on. With about 500 strength, this node will result in more than 1000 extra life. Then for the third one we want to get the integrated efficiency. And then finally for the last one we get the gem studded, which is another powerful node. If we don't get this one, then our build will run out of the effective support gems, so we want to get it to not only increase our DPS, but also to create the bigger explosions by using the Herald of the Ice. So feel free to use the exact same path as we have right here. And don't forget to check this video's description to find the link for this website, and this should make it easier for you to follow the path. Next up we have our Atlas passives. So when we start we want to first of all go to the right side and get all of these nodes. until we get this keystone called the Deadly Evolution. Then from here we want to circle back to the middle, and this time go up top, until we get to the second keystone called the Corrupted Infusion. And then from this point and onwards, you can unlock the rest of the nodes in whatever order you want. But then on top of this, we have even more passives. Which order in which you unlock them doesn't really matter, so this time it's up to you. And this is how it should look like for the ritual. Then next we have the Lyrium. Then third we have the bosses, and then on top of that we have the pinnacle bosses. Then next we also have our expedition setup, and then finally our breach setup. Then next we have our gear. The weapon of our choice is the Pillar of the Cage God. This is relatively cheap and common item, however in the early game we wanna use the Glacial Rune or the Storm Rune to increase its flat damage output even more. On top of this, if you get lucky enough, then you can also find this quarterstaff with 3 sockets. Then for the helmet we have the 3 dragons. And after you get the Hounds of the Wisdom in action, then this is the third priority that you should get, as it is mandatory to ensure that you are freezing enemies for a massive Herald of the Ice explosion. Then for the chest we have the Warrior Invictus. This is another powerful item, but this time not mandatory whatsoever, so use this one or anything similar. And for stats we wanna focus on increased evasion, more to strength, dexterity and intelligence, and more resistances like fire, cold, lightning and chaos. Then for the belt we have the double belt with increased charm charges. And for bonus stats we want max life, more to strength and chaos and fire resistance. Then for gloves we got the Hound of the Wisdom in action. This should be the second item that you prioritize after our weapon, as it is another core part of our build, and will enable us to stack our attributes and increase DPS by a massive amount. Then for the boots we're using the advanced hunting shoes with evasion and energy shield. And for more we want increased movement speed, max life, more to dexterity and fire and cold resistance. Then for first and second ring we got the same one called the Prismatic Ring, with more to all elemental resistances. And for more we want adds fire or cold damage to attacks, and more strength, dexterity and intelligence. And then finally for the amulet we have Amber Amulet with strength. And for more we want more to all attributes, more to strength and intelligence. No matter which gear you choose, just at least try to get 75% resistance cap on all 4 elements. This is the best setup in the endgame, and if you only can afford few things, then I would recommend to prioritize the weapon, then the gloves and finally the headpiece. And now finally, let's quickly take a look at how this build will work. So for maps and AoV farming, we simply want to spam our Tempest Flurry while making sure to maintain the charge staff for as long as possible. However, then for single targets and boss fights, we want to start by attacking with the Tempest Flurry to generate combo stacks. So then we use our Tempest Belt and then continue attacking with the Tempest Flurry. This combo will freeze the bell and generate a power charge. So then afterwards we use our power charge by casting the charge staff. So then, once the charge staff is active, we want to continue attacking the target with the Tempest Fury, and replace the Tempest Bell whenever it goes down. This setup's main focus is to run and press from 1 to 2 skills and then target big enemy groups to then weaken them and explode. One of the most powerful skills that we have in our arsenal is the Shockwave totem, and as you can see from the gameplay, we are just running into the enemies and one-shotting them without even trying. Also, our Ancestral Warrior Totem and the Scavenge Plating makes the most out of this by effectively extending the damage of this hit many times over, in order to kill big targets like the bosses or tanky rare monsters. Of course, like most melee builds, the armor explosion was nerfed, but our particular setup wasn't impacted as much as other melee builds, so currently this is by far one of the best warrior builds in the game. If you are looking for a powerful auto AoV machine to target enemies and delete them in split seconds, then this is the one for you. So let me show you the build, and for the main class I have chosen to go with the warrior, and our ascendancy is the warbringer. Then for the first skill we have the Mage Strike with the support gem called the Rage, Armor Explosion, Magnified Effect and the Primal Armament. And even after the new changes on how the armor breaker works, the Mage Strike still works perfectly fine, as long as you use it with the Cultist Great Hammer. Then second we got the Shockwave totem with Inspiration, Close Combat and Overpower. Then next we got the Scavenge Plating with the Precision, Vitality and Clarity. Next we have the Ancestral Warrior totem with the Sunder, Super Critical and Overabundance. Next up we have the Time of the Need with Fast Forward, Herbalism and Clarity. And finally, for the last one, we are using the Hammer of the Gods with Fist of War, Concentrated Effect, Exploit Weakness and Heft. Most of this setup is structured around using the Shockwave totem and the Mage Strike, to delete enemies in split seconds, so we use gems and skills that will support and increase their size and damage, while the rest are powerful buffs and utility skills that usually get activated in the background. And as our build is already super broken, so we don't have to use more than these 6 active skill gems. Next up we have our passive tree, and if you're interested in a full in-depth guide on how it works, then check out my beginner guide. So let's take a look at our setup, and we want to start at this melee damage node, and then go like this until we get all of these 4. So brutal, smash, sturdy metal and relentless. Then next up we want to go to this top right side like this, and then go to the left until we get this whole thing, so ancestral reach and the supportive ancestors. Next we circle back a little, and this time keep going until we reach the devastation node. Then next up we keep going and take the right side, and then keep going more until we get both of these, so carving earth and hardened wood. Then now keep moving forwards until the end, and from here we want to get both of these totem nodes. Which side you choose first doesn't really matter as long as you get both of them. And then finally from this point and onwards you can unlock the rest of the nodes in whatever order you prefer. All of these nodes that we got are very useful, but the ones I mentioned have the top priority as they're the most important ones to acquire early on in the game, to make our build functional, and then in the late game to make it even more powerful. Also, as far as attributes go, you just simply want to fulfill your attribute requirements to gear and skill gems, and then spend the rest of your leftover attributes into more strength. And then now let's go all the way to the middle again, and for our ascendancy build this is what we have. So at the beginning you want to unlock the anvil's weight, then second get the imploding impacts, then third we want the answered call, and then finally for the fourth option go with the wooden wall. Next up we have our atlas passives, and the general idea behind this is to aim for bonus stats that spawn a lot of grouped up monsters, such as in expeditions or in rituals. Our warrior build is also great at single target DPS, so we can also spend a bit points into farming boss maps or essences. So when we start, we want to first of all get to this bottom right side like this. Then from here we want to go until we get all the way to this keystone called the Deadly Evolution. Then next we go back to the middle, and this time take the bottom left side and get all of these passives. And then when all of these are done, then now we go again to the middle and now take the middle path and unlock the rest of the nodes in whatever order you prefer. Next we have our gear. The weapon of our choice is the Cultist Great Hammer, which is special, because its base stat does that our strike now deals splash damage to the targets within 1.8 meter range. And as I said, after the new changes to how the armor breaker works, the mace strike will now still work perfectly fine, but you specifically have to use this weapon, or otherwise switch the mace strike skill for something different like the Stampede. And then for bonus stats we want increased physical damage, more armor and more levels of all melee skills. Then for the helmet we have the Warrior Great Helm with armor. And for more we want max life, more accuracy, more intelligence and fire resistance. Then for chest we have the advanced full plate with armor. And for more we need max life, armor and cold resistance. Then for the belt we have the Rawhide belt with 20% quicker flask recovery. And for bonus stats we want max life, more armor and +2 to charm slots. Then for gloves we got the Interested gloves with energy shield. And for more we need max life, max mana and more levels to all melee skills. Then for boots we are using the advanced bronze greaves with armor. And for more we for sure want increased movement speed, and then also max life and resistances like cold and fire. Then for our first ring we got the ruby ring with fire resistance. And for more we'd want add physical damage, more intelligence and lightning resistance. While on the second one we have the topaz ring with lightning resistance. And for more we need max life, max mana, more strength and chaos resistance. And then finally for the amulet we got the crimson amulet with life regen per second. And for more we want max life, more armor, more dexterity and fire resistance. No matter which gear you choose, just at least try to get 75% resistance cap on all 4 elements. This is a starter setup, which should be more of an example of what stats and prefixes to look for. Then next we have runes. And now finally, let's quickly take a look at how this build will work. And to be honest, because of our setup, this build will be extremely powerful, no matter in what order you use your skills. But if you're interested in the most optimized damage rotation, then here it is. So for both clearing and bossing, you want to place down your Shockwave totem, and Ancestral Warrior, which is linked with the Sunder totem. And then you can also use the Mace Strike to get a bit of extra damage in. and then later to generate rage as well. And finally, when you are at high tier maps and at the full endgame, you'll also be wanting to use the Hammer of the Gods on stunned bosses. But since it relies on having more than just plus levels to all melee skills on your weapon, so it might not deal as much damage for you as it does for other builds. And that's why our main objective will be to focusing on crazy AoE damage and less at single targets. So this setup is a new combo between the Spark Sorceress and the Cast Comet and the Time Freeze. Our build will rely on high spark crits rather than drowning them in hundreds of different sparks. This way our clear speed will be as good as any other sorceress, but against bosses is the place where we are going to shine. Our crit scaling will reach crazy levels of damage. Even if you don't one-shot the boss, then you will have about 13 to 14 seconds, plus 7 seconds and even 3 more additional seconds of the time stops in your disposal. So if you are ready to destroy enemies and pretty much one-shot the bosses, then this is the one for you. So let me show you the build, and for the main class we are going with the Sorceress and our ascendancy is the Chronomancer. Then for the first skill we have Time Freeze with the Wind Wave, Second Wind and Unbreakable. Then second we got the Time Snap with no support gems. Then next we got Temporal Rift with Ingenuity. Next we have Temporal Chains with the Cursed Ground, Encumbrance, Expanse, Magnified Effect and Ritualistic Curse. Then for the next one we have the Cast on Critical with the Comet, Spell Echo, Elemental Focus, Inspiration and the Concentrated Effect. Next we got Conductivity with the Heightened Curse and the Focus Curse. Next we got the Soul Offering with the Minion Mastery, Dance Maccabi and the Ablation. Next we have Frost Wall with the Icicle, Cold Mastery, Spell Cascade and the Cold Exposure. Next up we have the Archmage with the Clarity and the Lightning Mastery. And finally we are using the Spark with the Acceleration, Electrocute, Consider Casting, Arcane Surge and the Arcane Tempo. Most of this setup is structured around using our sparks for AoE and temporal chains with Time Freeze for the single target. So we use gems and skills that will support and increase their duration and damage, while the rest are powerful buffs and utility skills that usually get activated in the background. Next up we have our passive tree, and if you're interested in a full in-depth guide on how it works, then check out my beginner guide. So let's take a look at our setup, and we want to start at the spell damage node, and then go like this while taking all of these three, so the raw power, practice science and the critical overload. Then now we keep on going until we get to the sudden escalation. Then from here again we keep going until the top and then take right. And then keep going until we get to the Whispers of the Doom, and then get both these lightning nodes. Then afterwards we keep going while taking pretty much all of these nodes right here, and then our second stop point is at this Eldritch Battery Keystone. And then finally from here we want to get all the way down here while taking these three, so the True Strike for the Juggler and the Deadly Force. And now from this point and onwards we can circle back and unlock the rest of the nodes in whatever order you prefer. All of these nodes that we got are very useful, but the ones I mentioned have the top priority, as they're the most important ones to acquire early on in the game, to make our build functional, and then later on the priority doesn't really matter that much. And then now let's go all the way to the middle again, and for Ascendancy build this is what we have. So at the beginning you want to unlock the Footprints in the Sand, then second now and again, then next we want the Ultimate Command, and then finally select the Unbound and Core. So feel free to use this exact same path as we have right here, and don't forget to check this video's description to find the link for this website, and this should make it easier for you to follow the path. Next we have our gear. The weapon of our choice is the Siphoning Wand, and for the bonus stats we want to gain damage as extra lightning damage, increase spell damage, more to max mana, more levels to all cold spells, increased mana regen and critical hit chance. Then also we got an offhand called the Expert Plummet Focus with Energy Shield. And for more we want increased spell and lightning damage, max mana, more to intelligence and increased mana regen and critical hit chance to spells. Then also we have the second weapon set, which is very important for our build to fully function. So for the weapon we got the Rattling Scepter with the max mana, reduced attribute requirements and more levels of all minion skills. While for our offhand we got the Crest of the Artura Shield with increased armor and energy shield, more to intelligence and increased mana regen and cooldown recovery. Then for helmet we have the Expert Feather Tiara with energy shield, and for more we got max energy shield, max mana and more to fire and cold resistance. Then for the chest we have the Expert Kate Raiment with energy shield, and for more we want increased mana regen and flask mana recovery, more to spirit and chaos and lightning resistance. Then for the belt we have the plate belt with more to armor, max mana and cold and fire resistance. Then for gloves we got the expert Sombri gloves with energy shield. And for more we want max energy shield, max mana and more to critical damage bonus. Then for boots we're using the expert feather sandals with energy shield. And for more we need increased movement speed, max energy shield and max mana. Then for our first ring we got the amethyst ring with the chaos resistance. And for more we want increased lightning damage, max mana, increased cast speed and mana regen. While for the second one we have the breach ring with increased cold and lightning damage, max mana, increased cast speed and increased mana regen rate. And then finally for amulet we have the solar amulet with more to spirit. And for bonus stats we want max mana, more to spirit and increased mana regen. No matter which gear you choose, just at least try to get 75% resistance cap on all 4 elements. This is the best case scenario setup, which should be more of an example of what stats and prefixes to look for. And now finally, let's quickly take a look at how this build will work. So, our rotation is quite simple, but you will need to get used to it. So what we want to do is first of all start by using the temporal chains. Then we follow that up with the conductivity. Then next use the time freeze in the combination with the soul offering. Then next we also want to activate the frost wall, and then from here just spam the sparks until the boss dies. But mainly for AoE and weak enemies, we basically will turn into a spark build. So just keep spamming sparks and see all of these crazy crits popping off left and right. The only thing you need to keep in mind is the defense. Our build does not have energy shields, so mind over matter is a good defensive layer, but should not be heavily relied on in the endgame. While the time freeze has a high cooldown, so feel free to use it 24/7. Then also the second wind for 33% no cooldown. And then the time snap reset will allow you to use the time freeze continuously in the combat. Overall, if you can master these skills, then you will become unkillable with very high DPS output at the same time. This setup is known as the Bombarding Minions build that mainly uses a Skeletal Arsonist for both AoE and single target damage, while then we can even further increase our DPS by casting Detonate the Dead, which explodes dead enemy corpses and let us speed farm every single content in the game. This build is the best of both worlds because it combines very quick clearing speed with aggressive playstyle while also having minions that protect you. And at the endgame you will be able to reach from 15 to 30,000 energy shield, which basically will turn us into an unstoppable puppet master. And on top of this, unlike other witch setups, our build will also focus on the Grim Feast buff that is used to provide an extremely strong defensive layer by doubling our energy shield in the maps, so that you can easily complete the highest tier maps in the game. So let me show you the build, and for the main class we are going with the Witch, and our ascendancy is the Infernalist. Then for the first skill we have the Pain Offering with the support gem called the Font of Rage, Persistence, Ablation and Font of Blood. Then second we get the Skeletal Storm Mage with the Conduction, Stormfire, Overcharge and the Lightning Penetration. Then next we get the Skeletal Cleric with the Ingenuity, Last Gasp and the Minion Mastery. Then next we have the Skeletal Warrior with the Maim, Culling Strike, Blind and the Physical Mastery. Next up we have the Skeletal Arsonist with a Scatter Shot, Heft, Fire Infusion, Feeding Frenzy and the Concentrated Effect. Next we got the Grim Feast with the Clarity. Next we also have the Detonate the Dead with the Spell Echo, Brutality, Magnified Effect and the Arcane Tempo. Next up we have the Summon Infernal Hound with the Meat Shield, Fire Exposure, Strip Away, Splinter and Demolisher. Then next we got Flammability with the Heightened Curse, Spell Cascade, Inspiration and the Focus Curse. Then for one of the last ones we have the Flame Wall with the Fortress, Arcane Surge and Mobility. And finally for the last one we are using the Raging Spirits with the Elemental Focus, Immolate, Martial Tempo and the Fire Mastery. Most of this setup is structured around using the skeletons and activating Detonate the Dead to delete huge amount of enemies in seconds. So we use gems and skills that will support and increase their size and damage, while the rest are powerful buffs and utility skills that usually get activated in the background. Next up we have our passive tree, and if you are interested in a full in-depth guide on how it works, then check out my beginner guide. So let's take a look at our setup, and we want to start at the spell and minion damage node. Then go like this until we get to all of these, so the Power of the Dead, Raw Destruction, Open Mind, Pure Energy, Living Death and the Dampening Shield. Then from here let's get this whole circle and then keep on going until we get to this node called the Grip of the Evil. Then now let's circle back and this time go to this top part, while also grabbing the Necrotic Touch and the Dead Can Dance. Then from this point we want to get the whole right side, and then when you got that, then from that point you can just unlock all the other nodes in whatever order you prefer. All of these nodes that we got are very useful, but the ones I mentioned have the top priority, as they're the most important ones to acquire early on in the game, to make our build functional, and then in the late game to make it even more powerful. Also, as far as attributes go, you just simply want to fulfill your attribute requirements for gear and skill gems, and then after that spend the rest of your leftover attributes into more intelligence. And then now let's go all the way to the middle again, and for Ascendancy build this is what we have. So at the beginning you want to unlock the Loyal Hellhound, for extra minion and reduce damage taken by 20%. Then second, get the Altered Flesh, which will help us to deal with physical damage if you have chaos resistance, or if you're stacking maximum fire resistance, then you will take less cold and lightning damage. Then third, we want to go with the Berat's Will, which will give us a lot more spirit, but we will sacrifice 25% life reservation, but for sure this is 100% worth it. And then finally, we want to get the Berat's Hand. Next up we have our Atlas passives, and the general idea behind this is to aim for bonus passives that spawn a lot of grouped up monsters, such as in expeditions or in rituals. So when we start, we want to first of all get to the left side and get all of these nodes, and then keep going down until you get to this keystone called the Deadly Evolution. And then from this point and onwards, you can unlock the rest of the nodes in whatever order you want. But then on top of this, we have even more passives. Which order in which you unlock them doesn't really matter, so again it's up to you. And this is how it should look like for the ritual. Then next we have Delirium. Then third we have the bosses, and then on top of that we have the pinnacle bosses. Then next we also have our expedition setup, and then finally our breach setup. Then next we have our gear. The weapon of our choice is the Rattling Scepter, which gives us the Skeletal Warrior skill. And for bonus stats we want to increase spirits, max mana, allies deal more damage, and get increased critical damage bonus. And then finally we gain more levels of all of our minion skills. On top of this, we also have an offhand called the Oak Sworn with the armor and energy shield. And for the extras from this we get a new skill called the Raised Shield. Then also increased block chance, increased armor and energy shield, more to spirits and chaos resistance. But the shield is not required and you can easily go with any other option just with similar stats. Then for the helmet we have the Expert Feather Tiara with the energy shield, and for more we want max energy, max life, more levels of all of our minion skills, and fire resistance. Then for the chest we have the Expert Altar Robe with the energy shield, and for bonus stats we got faster start of the energy shield recharge, then also increased max energy shield, more to spirit and cold resistance. Then for the belt we have the Fine Belt with our flask gaining faster charges for every second. And then for more we got max life, max mana, more to charm slots, and fire resistance. Then for the gloves we got the Expert Intrinsic Gloves with the energy shield. And for more we got max life, max energy shield, also increased max energy shield, and fire and cold resistance. Then for boots we're using the Expert Feathered Sandals with the energy shield. And for more we want increased movement speed, max energy shield, and chaos resistance. Then for our first and second ring we got the same thing, which is the Winter's Gamble. But again, this item is not required for this build to function. So if you can't or just don't want to get it, then you can go with any other ring as well. And then for bonus stats we want increased rarity, max life, more to spirit, fire, cold, and lightning resistance. And then finally for the amulet we got the Lunar Amulet with the max energy shield. And for more we want more to spirit, max life, plus levels of all of our minion skills, and fire and cold resistance. No matter which gear you choose, just at least try to get 75% resistance cap. This is a starter setup, which should be more of an example of what stats and prefixes to look for. And now finally, let's quickly take a look at how this build will work. So we want to start our highest damage rotation by first of all casting the Flame Wall, to summon Raging Spirits and then cast the Flame ability, to debuff your enemies. Then we cast the Pain Offering to buff your minions for a massive damage increase. And then finally in maps we want to use Detonate the Dead as soon as an enemy has died to explode their corpses, or improved even faster clearing speed. On top of this, if your minions get stuck then you can just set up your second weapon set to have a 0 summoned minions in the skill tab. By doing this, all of your minions will despawn when you spawn your second weapon set, so then you can quickly swap back to your main weapon set, which will cause all of your previous minions to respawn right next to you. So just keep this in mind. So this is an endgame build that is structured around using the Hexblast in the combination with other chaos skills that will curse and explode enemies in split seconds. Overall, Hexblast has quite high mana cost, and to make it efficient we are going to be using the Masked of the Sanguimancier, which will give us blood magic and increase critical hit chance. So now we can convert mana cost into life. On top of this, when possible, we can also use the Asterisk gloves to get instant leech from our critical hits. So then this combination would completely remove the mana from the equation and give us ability to infinitely spam the Hexblast and do massive amounts of damage. The main gameplay idea behind our setup is to one-shot most enemies, and as they die, they will continuously replenish our life and energy shield. However, for the bosses we will need to be careful, as not getting stun locked is our main priority, and that's why we will use a specific setup, such as putting Unbreakable Gem into our Hexblast slot and much more. So let me show you the build, and for the main class, I have chosen to go with the Witch and our ascendancy is Blood Mage. Then for the first skill we have the Hexblast with support gems such as Inspiration, Considered Casting, Arcane Tempo, Unbreakable and Concentrated Effect. Then second we get the Dark Effigy with the Envenom, Comorbidity, Ancestral Urgency and the Withering Touch. Then next we got Blasphemy with Despair, Magnified Effect and the Ritualistic Curse. Next we have Blink with Ingenuity. Next up we have the Sigil of the Power with no support gems. Next we got Cast on Critical with Contagion, Essence Drain, the Chaotic Freeze, Energy Retention and the Impetus. And next we have Grim Feast with no support gems. Then next we have the Soul Offering with the Persistence, Minion Mastery and Ablation. And finally for the last one we are using the Skeletal Warrior with the Meat Shield, Last Gasp and the Elemental Army. Most of this setup is structured around using the Hexblast to delete enemies in split seconds, so we use gems and skills that will support and increase their duration and damage, while the rest are powerful buffs and utility skills that usually get activated in the background. Also, don't forget that we are using 2 weapons, so in the first weapon slot we are going with the Blasphemy and the Cast on Critical, while in the second one we have the Skeletal Warrior and the Blink. Next up we have our passive tree, and if you are interested in a full in-depth guide on how it works, then check out my beginner guide. So let's take a look at our setup, and we want to start at this energy shield node, and then go like this while getting all of these 5. So there are Destruction, Practice Signs, Pure Energy, Dampening Shield and the Critical Overload. Then from here we now move to the right and get all of these 4. So Melding, Critical Exploit, Lingering Horror and the Royal. Then afterwards we circle back a little and then keep going until this point and then go to the left. And here we want to get all of these 3, so the Sudden Escalation, Void and the Heavy Buffer. And then from this point and onwards you can go here and up to the top, and just unlock all the other nodes in whatever order you prefer. All of these nodes that we got are very useful, but the ones I mentioned have the top priority, as they're the most important ones to acquire early on in the game, to make our build functional, and then in the late game to make it even more powerful. And then now let's go all the way to the middle again, and for Ascendancy build, this is what we have. So at the beginning you want to unlock the Sanguimancy. This one is just required to take for every Blood Mage, which will make all of our spells will now cast life as well as mana. Then second we get Vitality Siphon, which will give us Life Leech. This is currently the only way on how to get it, as this will give us a ton of extra recovery and make it very useful, especially against bosses. Then third we get Gore Spike. This will increase our critical damage for every 40 life. Ideally we want to get as high critical bonus as possible. And then finally we get Southern the Flesh. This will allow us to remove some critical hit chance passives and allocate them to the other gem nodes to not go over 100%. And don't forget to check this video's description to find the link for this website, and this should make it easier for you to follow the path. Next up we have our Atlas passives, and the general idea behind this is to aim for bonus passives that spawn a lot of grouped up monsters, such as in expeditions or in rituals. So when we start we want to first of all go to the right side and get all of these nodes, and then keep going down until you get to this keystone called the Deadly Evolution. And then from this point and onwards you can unlock the rest of the nodes in whatever order you want. But then on top of this we have even more passives, which order in which you unlock them doesn't really matter, so this time it's up to you. And this is how it should look like for the ritual. Then next we have Delirium. Then third we have the bosses, and then on top of that we have the pinnacle bosses. Next we also have our expedition setup, and then finally our breach setup. Next we have our gear. The weapon of our choice is the Withering Wand with a Chaos Bolt. And for bonus stats, we want more extra lightning damage, increased spell and chaos damage, then also plus levels to all chaos spells, and increased critical hit chance and cast speed. On top of this, we also have the second weapon slot in which we are using the Chiming Staff for the Sigil of the Power. And for more, we want more levels of all spell skills and increased critical hit chance. And don't forget about the specific abilities I told you to slot in for each weapon in my skill gem part of this video. And then also for the first weapon, we got an offhand called the Advanced Antler Focus with Energy Shield. And for more, we want even more max Energy Shield, increased spell and chaos damage, plus levels of all spell skills and increased critical hit chance and cast speed. Then for the helmet, we have the Mask of the Sanguimancier. And during long boss fights, we will run into a mana problem, and even just to scale our spamminess of the build, we wanna use it, and this will give us blood magic, which will convert our mana cost into life. So this is the only required item that you need for this build to work efficiently. Then for chest, we have Expert Hexer's Robe with the Energy Shield, and for more we got even more max Energy Shield, max life, Mortal Spirit, and Fire, Cold and Chaos resistance. Then for the belt, we have the long belt with increased charm effect duration. And for more, we want max life, increased flask life recovery and charm effect duration, as well as plus charm slots. And then finally, we also want the fire and chaos resistance. Then for gloves, we got the sorceress with armor. This is not required, however, if you want to scale your damage to the max and completely remove mana cost from our life, then we want to get these gloves as well. Then for boots, we're using the Expert Feather Sandals with the Energy Shield. And for more, we need increased movement speed, max energy and life, and also cold, lightning and chaos resistance. Then for the first ring, we have the Amethyst Ring with the chaos resistance. And for bonus stats, we got increased chaos damage, max life, increased cast speed, more to all elemental resistances and chaos resistance. While for the second one, we have the Pearl Ring with increased cast speed. And for more, we want increased chaos damage, max life, increased cast speed, more to all elemental resistances and chaos resistance. And then finally for amulet, we have the Solar Amulet with Mortal Spirit. And for extras, we got max life and Energy Shield, then even Mortal Spirit, then plus levels to all spell skills, then even increased critical hit chance and more percentage to all elemental resistances. No matter which gear you choose, just at least try to get 75% resistance cap on all 4 elements. This is just a starter setup, which would be more of an example of what stats and prefixes that you need to look for. And now finally, let's quickly take a look at how this build will work. And this setup is pretty straightforward. So for mapping, we simply want to spam the Hexblast, which when we reduce our mana cost to pretty much 0 and increase our cast speed, then we can even further maximize our DPS output. On top of this, because of the insane spam potential, so we won't have to worry about the enemies, as they will die very quickly. However, for stronger targets, watch out for stuns and getting stun locked, which is the only real danger that we want to avoid as much as possible. And then finally for the boss fights, this time we want to start by activating the Sigil of the Power. And then from this point, just again spam the Hexblast until the boss dies. And then just reactivate debuffs as soon as they expire.